The hammer struck the shackle with such force that sparks flew like angry fireflies in the dim barn. Blacksmith Benton Coleridge didn't pause to wipe the sweat from his brow as he brought down another crushing blow, his massive shoulders rippling with determination. The woman before him, beaten, trembling, but with eyes that burned like molten gold, watched each strike as if witnessing her own resurrection. "Hold still," Miss Benton's voice rumbled low, gentler than his powerful frame. Suggested. One more strike should do it. Eliza Meridian had been running for 3 days through the Colorado wilderness, her ankles raw and bleeding from the iron restraints that marked her as property of the Garrison plantation. When she'd stumbled into Copper Falls at dawn, more dead than alive, she'd followed the rhythmic pounding of metal on anvil. Like a beacon of hope, the final blow came down with the weight of divine justice. The shackle split in two, clattering to the hay-strewn floor like discarded snakeskin. Eliza stared at her freed ankle, then up at the mountain of a man who'd just changed her destiny with 3 swings of his hammer. "You're bleeding, Benton," observed, his calloused hands surprisingly gentle as he examined the raw wounds the iron had carved into her flesh. "We need to tend to these before infection sets in." "Why?" The word came out as barely a whisper. "Why would you help me?" "Don't. You know what I am?" Benton's steel-gray eyes met hers without flinching. "I know you're a woman in need of help. That's all I need to know." The barn door burst open with such violence that both Benton and Eliza spun toward the sound. Marshal Thorne Wickham filled the doorway, his badge glinting in the morning light filtering through the wooden slats. Behind him stood 3 men on horseback, plantation hunters, with the cold eyes of professional predators. "Well," Marshal Wickham drawled, his hand resting casually on the grip of his Colt. "Benton Coleridge, I should have known you'd be mixed up in this mess, that there's stolen property you're harboring." Benton stepped protectively in front of Eliza, his hammer still gripped in his massive fist. "Property? I see a free woman standing in my shop." "Papers say different," sneered Cassius Marrow, the lead bounty hunter. His scarred face twisted into a cruel smile as he dismounted. "Got a $1,000 reward riding on that pretty little head. Dead or alive, though I'd prefer alive for the entertainment value. She's not going anywhere." Benton's voice carried the finality of a judge's gavel. The tension in the barn stretched taut as a bowstring. Eliza could feel the weight of her freedom hanging by a thread, balanced on the edge of this giant man's courage. Behind Benton's broad shoulders, she clutched a piece of broken chain, the first thing she'd ever held as a free woman. "You're making a mistake, Blacksmith," Marshal Wickham warned. "The law's the law, and harboring a runaway slave is a federal crime." Benton raised his hammer, and the morning sun caught the metal head like it was forged from starlight itself. "Then I guess we'll have to forge a new law." The standoff exploded into chaos faster than summer lightning. Cassius Marrow went for his gun, but Benton's hammer was already in motion. The heavy iron head caught the bounty hunter's wrist with a sickening crack, sending the pistol spinning into the hay. Marrow screamed and crumpled, clutching his shattered bones. "Kill the blacksmith," Marshal Wickham roared, drawing his own weapon. But Eliza was already moving. She grabbed the broken shackle from the floor and hurled it with deadly precision. The iron struck Wickham's gun hand, deflecting his shot into the barn's wooden beam above their heads. Benton seized the moment, charging forward with the fury of a mountain avalanche. His massive frame crashed into the second bounty hunter, Mordecai Flint, driving the man backward through the barn door and into the dirt outside. The third hunter, a Weasley man called Pike, tried to circle around for a clear shot at Eliza. "Behind you," Eliza shouted. Benton spun just as Pike's finger tightened on the trigger. Without thinking, the blacksmith grabbed a horseshoe from his workbench and sent it flying like a discus. The iron shoe struck Pike square in the forehead, dropping him like a felled tree. Marshal Wickham had recovered his gun and was taking aim at Benton's broad back when Eliza made her choice. She snatched up a red-hot iron poker from the forge and pressed it against the marshal's neck. The smell of burning flesh filled the barn as Wickham shrieked and dropped his weapon. "That's for every lash, every chain, every night I dreamed of. Freedom," she whispered in his ear. The fight was over in less than 2 minutes. Marrow writhed in the hay, his gun hand useless. Pike lay unconscious, blood trickling from his scalp. Flint groaned in the dirt outside, his ribs likely cracked from Benton's charge. Marshal Wickham sat in the corner, pressing his bandana too. The poker burn on his neck, his authority stripped away as surely as bark from a birch tree. "You've done it now," Wickham gasped. "Assaulting a federal marshal, harboring a fugitive. They'll hang you both." Benton helped Eliza to her feet, noting how her hands shook despite the fire in her eyes. "Then we'd better make sure they don't catch us." "You don't understand," Eliza protested. "I won't let you throw your life away for me. You don't even know me." The blacksmith's weathered face softened as he looked down at her. "I know you fought beside me when you could have run. I know you're brave enough to burn a man's neck for threatening my back. That's enough." Outside, horses thundered into the town square. More bounty hunters, drawn by the gunshots. Benton quickly assessed their options. The back door led to the creek, but beyond that lay open prairie, with nowhere to hide. The mountains offered shelter, but Eliza was in no condition for a hard ride. "Can you handle a horse?" he asked urgently. "Better than I can handle chains?" she replied with grim determination. Benton moved to a hidden panel in the barn wall, revealing the saddled horse as a massive black stallion that matched his own imposing frame. A smaller but sturdy mare with intelligent eyes. "I keep them ready," he explained, seeing her surprise. "Never know when a person might need to leave town in a hurry." As they mounted up, Marshal Wickham made one last desperate play for authority. "There's nowhere you can run that we won't find you. The whole territory knows your faces now." Benton paused in the doorway, his silhouette filling the frame like an avenging angel.
Ow.
"Then I guess we'll have to find somewhere beyond the territory." They rode out through the back door just as a dozen more bounty hunters surrounded the front of the barn. Their freedom measured in heartbeats and the speed of their horses, hooves against the Colorado earth. The chase lasted 3 days across terrain that would have broken lesser riders. Benton led them through hidden canyons and forgotten trails that only someone born to the mountains could navigate. Behind them, the pursuit grew larger. Each day Marshal Wickham had put word out across the territory. And every gun for hire west of the Mississippi was riding hard for that $1,000 bounty. On the third night, they made camp in a cave. High above a rushing river, the horses exhausted and their supplies nearly gone. Eliza sat by the small fire, tending to infected cuts on her ankles, while Benton kept watch at the cave mouth. The flickering flames cast dancing shadows on the stone walls, making the space feel intimate despite their desperate circumstances. "Me about the plantation," Benton said quietly, his eyes never leaving the valley below. Eliza's hands stilled on the bandages. "What's there to tell? I was born there, raised there, worked there until 3 days ago, when I decided I'd rather die free than live in chains. That's not what I meant." Her, his steel-gray eyes, gentle in the firelight. "Tell me about you. Who is Eliza Meridian when she's not running for her life?" The question caught her off guard. No one had ever asked about her dreams, her thoughts, her essence as a human being. I used to forge things, small things." The overseer didn't know. "Hairpins, jewelry, little decorative pieces for the other women. I'd sneak into the plantation smithy at night and use the leftover heat from the day's work." Benton's eyebrows rose in surprise. "You're a smith? Am I don't know anymore?" She held up her hands, showing calluses that matched his own. "My father was the plantation blacksmith before he died. He taught me in secret," said a woman with a trade wood. "Never be completely powerless." A slow smile spread across Benton's weathered face. "Your father was a wise man. He was a dead man the day Master Garrison found out he'd been teaching me to read and forge iron." The bitterness in her voice could have cut glass. "But not before he gave me something Garrison could never take away: knowledge." Their conversation was interrupted by the distant sound of hoofbeats echoing off the canyon walls. Benton immediately doused the fire and moved to the cave entrance, his hand instinctively finding the rifle he'd taken from one of the bounty hunters. "They're close," he whispered. "Too close." Below them, torches flickered like fallen stars as the hunting party spread out along the riverbank. At least 20 men, maybe more. Even from this distance, They could hear Marshal Wickham's voice carrying on the night air. Search every cave, every overhang, every shadow. I want them found before dawn. Eliza joined Benton at the cave mouth, her heart hammering against her ribs. There are too many. Even if we had enough ammunition, we're not fighting. Benton interrupted, his mind already working through their options. We're running. There's an old mining trail about a mile north that leads over the mountain pass. It's treacherous in daylight and suicide at night, but it's our only chance. And the horses. Benton's jaw tightened. We leave them. They've carried us as far as they can, but where we're going, we go on foot or not at all. They gathered there. Meager supplies and silence, each lost in thoughts of what lay ahead. As they prepared to abandon the cave that had sheltered them, Eliza suddenly grabbed Benton's arm. Why are you doing this? Really? You had a life, a business, a place in that town. You threw it all away for a woman you don't even know. Why? Benton was quiet for so long that she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of old pain. Because 15 years ago, I watched my sister get dragged back to a plantation after she'd made it all the way to Colorado. Watched them chain her to a wagon wheel and beat her until she couldn't stand. I was just a boy then, too young and too scared to help her. He met Eliza's eyes in the darkness. I swore on her grave that if I ever got another chance to help someone break their chains, I'd take it no matter the cost. Tears Eliza didn't even know she was shedding caught the starlight on her cheeks. What was her name? Frida Benton said simply. Her name was Freedom. The mining trail was a ribbon of death carved into the mountainside by desperate men seeking gold and finding only graves. In darkness so complete it seemed solid, Benton and Eliza felt their way along the narrow path, loose rocks skittering, into the abyss with each careful step. Behind them, the torches of their pursuers had spread out like a constellation of malice. Growing closer, despite the treacherous terrain. Don't look down, Benton whispered, his hand finding hers in the blackness. His focus on the next step, then the next one after that. Eliza's fingers intertwined with his, drawing strength from his unwavering presence. How do you know about this trail? I helped build part of it back when I first came to Colorado. Before I learned that some mountains don't give up their secrets. Willingly. His voice carried the memory of younger, more foolish days. Lost 3 good men to this pass before we admitted defeat and moved the mining operation to easier ground. A shout echoed from below one of the bounty hunters had found the cave and discovered it empty. Marshal Wickham's curses carried clearly on the thin mountain air, followed by orders to spread the search wider. Time was running out like sand through an hourglass. Halfway across the most treacherous section of the trail, Eliza's foot slipped. On a patch of loose shale, she would have plummeted into the darkness if not for Benton's iron grip on her wrist, hauling her back against the mountain face with strength that defied belief. I've got you, he breathed against her ear, his arm wrapped protectively around her waist. Always got you. In that moment, pressed against the cold stone with death yawning beneath them and danger closing from behind, something fundamental shifted between them. What had begun as a desperate alliance forged in violence was transforming into something deeper, stronger than the iron chains that had once bound her. Benton, she whispered, her voice barely audible above the wind. We don't make it. We'll make it, he said with absolute certainty. We'll have to. I didn't break those chains just to watch you die on some forgotten mountain trail. They pressed on, their world reduced to the feel of rock beneath their hands, and the sound of their own labored breathing. Hours passed in a haze of exhaustion, in determination, until finally, miraculously, the trail began to widen. Dawn was breaking over the eastern peaks when they stumbled onto a broader ledge that marked the old mining camp. The camp was a graveyard of abandoned dreams, rotting timbers, rusted equipment, and the skeletal remains of buildings that had once housed hundreds of hopeful prospectors. But to Benton and Eliza, it looked like salvation itself. There, Benton pointed to a structure that seemed more intact than the others. The old assay office. It's got thick walls and only one way in or out. We can hold them off there if we have to. They had just reached the building when the first of the bounty hunters appeared on the trail behind them. Pike, his head still bandaged from the horseshoe incident, raised his rifle with shaking hands. End of the line, Blacksmith. Nowhere left to cross the camp. Nowhere left to run now. But Benton was smiling, the first genuine smile Eliza had seen from him since this nightmare began. Actually, he called back, his voice carrying easily across the morning air, I'd say we're right where we need to be. His hand found the handle of a mining cart, filled with old blasting powder, and suddenly, Eliza understood. The mountain hadn't given up its gold, but it was about to give them something far more valuable, a chance at freedom. You wouldn't, Pike stammered, seeing the same realization dawn on his face. You'd kill us all. Only if you make me, Benton replied, striking a match. Your choice, Pike. You can go back down that trail and tell Wickham that some fights aren't worth winning. Or you can find out if this powder is still good after 15 years in the mountain air. The match burned down toward Benton's fingers. As Pike weighed his options, a $1,000 bounty against certain death in a mining camp explosion. Behind him, more bounty hunters were reaching the camp. But their weapons seemed suddenly inadequate against a man holding fire over enough explosives to level half the mountain. This isn't over, Pike snarled, but he was already backing toward the trail. Yes, Benton said quietly, blowing out the match. It is. 3 months later, the valley on the far side of the mountain had become home in ways neither Benton nor Eliza could have imagined. Hidden from the world by towering peaks and accessible only through a treacherous pass that few would dare to attempt, the abandoned settlement of Redemption Creek offered them something both had thought: lost forever peace. The town had been built by religious outcasts seeking isolation from a world that couldn't accept their beliefs. What they'd left behind was a collection of sturdy buildings, fertile land, and most importantly to Benton, a complete blacksmith shop with a forge that hadn't felt fire in nearly a decade. Hand me that bellows handle, Eliza called from her position at the anvil, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who'd finally found her true calling. This horseshoe won't shape itself. Benton smiled as he worked the leather bellows, sending streams of air across the glowing coals. Watching Eliza work iron was like watching poetry written in sparks and steel. Her movements held an economy of motion that spoke of natural talent refined by desperate necessity during those stolen midnight hours at the plantation forge. Your father would be proud, he said, admiring the perfect curve of the shoe she was forming. He'd be amazed, Eliza corrected, setting down her hammer to wipe sweat from her brow. He taught me the basics, but this... She gestured at the fully functional smithy they'd built together. This is something he only dreamed about. A forge where I can create whatever I want, whenever I want, with no master to tell me otherwise. They'd spent the first month simply surviving hunting, fishing, and making the basic repairs needed to make the settlement livable. But as autumn approached, and it became clear that no pursuit was coming over the mountain pass, they'd begun to build rather than merely endure. The forge had been Eliza's idea, but Benton's skill and strength that made it reality. Together, they'd reconstructed the old smithy, improved the bellows system, and even added innovations that neither had seen in their previous lives. It was, Eliza often thought, what partnership was supposed to look like: two people making each other stronger. We need to talk about the future, Benton said, his tone growing serious as he banked the fire for the evening. Winter's coming, and we're not prepared for the isolation it'll bring. The pass will be snowed in from November through April. Eliza nodded, having thought about this herself. 6 months of just us and whatever supplies we can lay in.
No way.
Out. No way for anyone to reach us, even if they wanted to. The question is, Benton continued, meeting her eyes across the cooling forge, is that what you want? Because I need to know where we stand before the snow flies. Are we partners hiding from the world, or are we? He trailed off, unable to finish the thought. Or are we building something permanent? Eliza supplied softly, something that could last beyond the winter, beyond the running, beyond the fear. The silence that followed was filled with the soft sounds of evening wind through the pines. The distant call of a mountain hawk, the gentle settling of cooling iron. When Eliza finally spoke, her words carried the weight of a decision made. Not in desperation, but in hope. Benton Coleridge, you broke the chains that bound my body, but that's not why I love you." She stepped closer, her hand finding his across the width of the anvil that had become the altar of their new life. "Love you because you helped me forge something new from the broken pieces of what I used to be. You helped me become who I was always meant to be." The kiss that followed was gentle at first, tentative as a first spark on tinder, but like all fires properly tended, it grew stronger, warmer, until it blazed with the promise of warmth through even the coldest winter nights. When they finally broke apart, Benton's eyes held a light that had nothing to do with the banked coals of the forge. "Then we'd better start planning a wedding," he said simply, "because I intend to spend whatever time we have left on this earth making sure you never have cause to regret the choice you made in that barn." Outside their sanctuary, the first snow of the season began to fall, each flake a benediction on their new beginning. The wedding took place on the first day of November, with autumn's last golden light filtering through the workshop windows and the forge burning bright as a beacon of promise. They had no preacher, no guests, no legal documents, just as souls choosing to bind themselves together with vows forged from their own words and witnessed by the mountains that had sheltered their love. Eliza wore a dress of deep blue wool that she'd sewn herself, simple but elegant in the way that true beauty always is. Benton had fashioned matching rings from gold he'd found while expanding their water system, thin bands that caught the firelight like captured starlight. "I take you Eliza Meridian," Benton said, his voice steady as mountain stone, "not as my property or my possession, but as my equal partner in whatever life we build together. I promise to stand beside you, not above you, to strengthen your hands when they falter, and to never let anyone put chains on your spirit again. I take you, Benton Coleridge, not as my rescuer or my master, but as my chosen companion. You gave me freedom, but more than that, you gave me the courage to claim it. I promise to forge our future together, one day at a time, one choice at a time, with love as our hammer and hope as our anvil." They sealed their vows by working iron, together each, taking turns with hammer and tongs to create a horseshoe that they hung above their cabin door, a symbol of protection and good fortune for the home they were building together. The winter that followed was the happiest either had ever known. Snowed in from November through March, they discovered the profound joy of quiet companionship. Eliza taught Benton to read by firelight, using books they'd found in the old settlement. He taught her advanced metalworking techniques, and together, they planned improvements for the spring. But their greatest creation that winter wasn't made of iron or steel. It was the deep, abiding love that grew stronger with each passing day. They learned each other's rhythms, fears, and dreams. They discovered that passion could burn as bright in a mountain cabin as anywhere else, and that true partnership meant both knowing when to lead and when to follow. "What do you think about children?" Eliza asked one snowy evening as they sat before their fireplace, her head resting on Benton's broad shoulder. "I think," he said carefully, "that any child raised by you would grow up knowing they could be anything they chose to be, chains or no chains. And raised by you, they'd learn that strength isn't about the size of your muscles, but the size of your courage." Spring arrived with a rush of snowmelt and the return of hope. The pass cleared earlier than expected, and with it came a moment of reckoning. Would anyone still be looking for them? Had Marshal Wickham given up the chase? Or were bounty hunters still combing the territory? The answer came in the form of a lone rider who appeared at their door one April morning, his hands raised to show he came in peace. To their amazement, it was Deputy Marcus Hale from Copper Falls, but he wore no badge and carried no weapons. "Marshal Wickham's dead," he announced without preamble. "Died of infection from that poker burn last winter." The new marshal couldn't care less about old bounties from a corrupt lawman. As far as the territorial government is concerned, Eliza Meridian died on that mountain trail, and Benton Coleridge disappeared while helping a fugitive escape. "Meaning?" Benton asked cautiously. "Meaning you're free to start over anywhere you choose, new names, new lives, clean slates." Hale paused, looking around at the improvements they'd made to the settlement. "Well, from the looks of things, you might not want to go anywhere." That night, As they lay in their bed listening to spring rain on the cabin roof, Eliza spoke the words that would shape the rest of their lives. "I don't want new names or a different life," she said quietly. "I want this life with you in this place we've built together. I want to be Eliza Coleridge, wife of the mountain blacksmith, for whatever years were granted." Benton's arms tightened around her. "Then that's who you'll be," he promised. "And I'll spend every day earning the right to call myself your husband." 10 years later, the settlement of Redemption Creek had grown into something that would have amazed the original founders. What had begun as a refuge for two desperate souls, fleeing injustice, had blossomed into a thriving community of families seeking freedom from the constraints of conventional society. The Coleridge Forge had become the beating heart of the settlement. Benton and Eliza worked side by side, their partnership as strong as the steel they shaped. They had expanded beyond simple blacksmithing to create tools, hardware, and artistic pieces that were sought after throughout the territory. More importantly, they'd trained a new generation of smiths who understood that metalworking was as much about precision and patience as it was about strength. "Papa, watch this," called their daughter Liberta from her position at a smaller anvil designed specifically for her 8-year-old frame. She was attempting to forge a nail. Her small hands guided by Eliza's patient instruction, Benton smiled as he watched his wife teach their daughter the trade that had brought them together. Liberta had inherited Eliza's quick mind and gentle touch with metal, along with Benton's determination and strength of character. She would grow up knowing that she could be anything she chose: smith, scholar, or whatever else her heart desired. Their son, Justice, was only 3, but already showed fascination with the forge. He would sit for hours watching his parents work, his dark eyes, so like his mother's, tracking every movement of hammer and tongs. Benton had no doubt that both children would carry on the family tradition, but more importantly, they would carry on the family values of freedom, equality, and love. "Mr. Coleridge," called a voice from the shop entrance. They looked up to see Rebecca Wainwright, young woman who'd arrived at Redemption Creek 3 months earlier, fleeing an arranged marriage she'd never consented to. Like so many who found their way to the Hidden Valley, she'd come seeking freedom, and found family instead. "My brother's telegram finally came through," Rebecca continued, holding up a yellow slip of paper. "He wants to know if there's room in your apprentice program for his oldest boy. Says he's heard the Coleridge Forge is the finest smithy west of the Mississippi, and he wants his son to learn from the best." Eliza and Benton exchanged glances filled with pride and satisfaction. Their reputation had spread far beyond the mountain valley, but not just for their metalworking skills. The Coleridge Forge was known throughout the territory as a place where anyone could learn a trade regardless of their background, gender, or past circumstances. "There's always room for someone willing to learn," Benton replied. "He's welcomed along with anyone else who wants to make an honest living with their hands." As evening fell over Redemption Creek, the Coleridge family gathered around their dinner table, the same table Benton had built during their first winter together. The years had been kind to them, bringing prosperity, respect, and most importantly, the deep contentment that comes from a life lived according to one's own values. "Tell us the story again, Mama," Liberta requested, as she did most nights, "about how Papa broke your chains." Lisa smiled, her hand finding Benton's across the table, just as it had that first day in the forge. "Well," she began, "it started with the sound of a hammer striking iron, and a man who understood that some chains are meant to be broken." She told their story, softening the violence for young ears, but never diminishing the courage. It had taken, Benton reflected on, the strange paths that had brought them to this moment. He'd thought he was simply helping a desperate woman escape bondage, never dreaming that in freeing her, he would free himself from a lifetime of loneliness and regret. Later, after the children were asleep and the fire had burned down to glowing embers, Benton and Eliza stepped outside to look at the stars scattered like diamonds across the mountain sky. "Any regrets?" he asked, as he had every year on the anniversary of their first meeting. "Only one," Eliza replied with a smile that still had the power to stop his heart. "I regret that it took me so long to find my way to that barn where a mountain of a man was waiting to change my life with 3 swings of his hammer." They stood together in the peaceful darkness, Surrounded by the community they'd built and the family they'd created, their love a beacon of hope for anyone still wearing chains, literal or metaphorical, the blacksmith and his wife had indeed forged a life together, one strike at a time, one choice at a time, with courage as their hammer and love as their anvil in the distance. The sound of metal on metal rang out from the forge where their newest apprentice worked the night shift, learning that some things in life, freedom, love, and the satisfaction of honest work, are worth any price, any sacrifice, any risk. The sound carried on the mountain wind like a promise that somewhere in the world there would always be those willing to break the chains that bind the human spirit, forge something beautiful from the broken pieces left behind in the old American West. Freedom came at a high price, but for those brave enough to pay it, the rewards lasted forever. This is the story of two souls who chose love over safety, courage over comfort, and in doing so, built something that would endure long after the mountains themselves had forgotten their names.